Hello. I've been a trucker for about 20 years now, doing both local runs as well as long hauls. I listen to a lot of podcasts covering similar topics like yours, and thanks to my wife, she introduced me to your channel and she convinced me to send in a story that happened to us a while back. We work well together, and there's never a dull moment between us. This was something we experienced on one of our trips. I was getting pretty close to my 11th hour driving, and my wife wanted to sleep in our cab instead of a motel. I had made some upgrades to the cab and added some simple amenities, so it was pretty comfortable. We were on a pretty flat and open area of the highway, so we stopped on the side and set out my cones for safety. One thing I did have in my cab was a refrigerator, as well as a small portable grill, so we would often bring along our own food to make. We pulled out some hamburger patties in the grill and started making a late dinner for us. The night was actually quite peaceful, and the only light on us was from our flashlight, or my clip-on light that I used when under the hood. We could hear the sounds of crickets chirping and the smell of petrichor coming from the nearby vegetation. There was a massive storm the night before after what locals told me was a pretty long drought for them. As we indulged in our meals, we talked and relaxed in our chairs, staring into the trees and taking in the simple joys of existence. When our conversation started getting shorter and shorter, we knew that it was about time to pack up and head to bed. That was around the time that something started to feel unusual. I was trying to figure out what it was when my wife said, "Do you hear that?" I remained quiet to see if I could discern what she meant, but I didn't hear anything. But that was her point. Unlike how it was just a few minutes ago, it was completely silent. There wasn't a single cricket chirping, no sound from the slight breeze and trees swaying, not even a low hum coming from our light. All I could hear was our talking and my breaths. We both agreed that it was an odd occurrence and chalked it up to maybe another storm coming, and mentally we both understood that we should hurry up and get back in the cab. As my wife was getting ready for bed, I was at the front in the driver's seat putting my wallet in the glove box. There was something in the distance that kind of caught my eye. It was a light. There was nothing but darkness surrounding us just prior, other than the one car that had passed by. As mentioned, we were on a pretty flat stretch of highway, but I could clearly see a light just peeking up from the distance in front of us. As we were on the road, I told myself that it was just an oncoming car, turned off the cab light, and walked towards the back. From the time it took me to walk back to the bed and sit on it, that car should have passed us. But I never heard the sound, so I asked my wife if she heard or saw anything, and she declined. This had my interest piqued, so I stood back up to look out the front window, and there it was. The light was still sitting there, like I had seen earlier. This time, I was telling my wife what I was seeing, which caused her to join me. We both stared at this light, trying to determine what it could be, and thought maybe it was another vehicle that was stopped on the side of the road too. We thought about it for a moment. My wife, being the altruistic person she was, wanted to see if maybe they needed help, whereas I've heard and seen way too many stories of similar situations, and told her that we were not going out there. She suggested that we could just drive up to it, but that would involve me having to get out, get my cones, and really, to be honest, I was tired, and being way too lazy to do that. So I told her that we should just leave it alone, and if they were still there in the morning, we could check it out. She reluctantly agreed, and we both went to bed, but I still couldn't shake this thought that there was something more to that light. After my wife had drifted off, I still laid there awake, wondering what it could be, so I ended up getting up to look again. It was still there, but this time, it was different. Prior, it was the normal color that I would expect for headlights. This was now a deep yellow color. The odds of it being another car in the exact same spot, right out of view with different colored headlights, just seemed very unlikely. Something told me that I needed to do something, to have a record of this. So I went to grab my phone and get a picture or video of it. As I quietly returned and opened the camera, I watched the light shift slightly and change from yellow to red. This caused me to freeze and just watch. That's when I felt the vibration in the floor beneath my feet. I looked back at the light and watched as it grew wider and taller, until I was hit with the bright neon red light. I couldn't look directly at it, it was so bright. But as it rose up, I could see a metal shape of some kind of vehicle, but I couldn't make out what it was. And as I was trying to shield my eyes from the light, it slowly grew darker, until I was able to look again. That's when I noticed the road was now shrouded in that red light. It was almost as if the source of the light was now directly above us, but the light was still so intense. Not only was it bright, but you could almost feel the heat coming from it. What the hell could possibly cause something like that? Lastly, in nearly an instant, I saw the light flash back to the deep yellow that I had seen, and the rumbling had stopped. I didn't understand how my wife hadn't woken up to this. It was almost like an airplane was flying very low to the ground. It was that kind of rumbling. With the light now directly above us, my curiosity got the best of me, and I opened my driver's side door to try and look for the source of the light. I looked straight up, and could make out what looked to be a dark triangle hovering above us. The light was definitely coming from this thing, and I felt as though I had just outed myself. I quickly shut the door, and I went back to bed praying that what I saw wasn't real and that I was just dreaming. I was hoping that my prayers were answered when I was awoken by my wife. But something was wrong. She sounded startled, and I was on the floor, not the bed. When I finally came to and had my bearings, I assured her that I was fine and asked what had happened. She said that she woke up to an intense high-pitched ringing sound, and when she looked over at me, she saw me sitting on the floor. She was terrified, but by the time I came to, the sound was gone and I never heard it. In fact, even with the rumbling in the ground, it was still silent, all the way through. But one of the many parts of this that was bizarre was that I remember walking back to the bed again and getting in it. Yet, I was on the floor. We climbed back into bed, and I told her everything I had seen, and she did the same, even though she was asleep through most of it. We both got up and looked outside, but it was now completely dark. There were no yellow or red lights anywhere. The road was empty, and we could even hear the wind and crickets again. Then we checked the time and realized that it had only been about 2 hours. I believe that I laid in bed for about half an hour before I got up, so all of that happened, and then I guess I passed out for about an hour to an hour and a half. After convincing my wife that I felt fine, I thought that it was best to just try to get some sleep. I felt exhausted. When we awoke the next morning, I slowly drove in the direction of the light, and there was nothing there. The road was fine. The grass on the side wasn't even flattened like something had been there. We talked about it a bit more as we drove, and we both agreed that it was possibly some kind of military aircraft, I guess. We didn't talk about it for the rest of our trip. In fact, we made sure that we were both in bed, and we only stayed at rest stops and never on the side of the road, secluded from others. It wasn't until we were back home in the privacy of our own house that we finally said out loud what we thought. With the lights and the way that it hovered without any sound, that was no aircraft that we were familiar with. But we were both still pretty terrified to think about what it could have been. Not to mention what could have possibly happened to me since I didn't actually make it to the bed. And honestly, I think I would rather stick to encountering weird people than something that I can't see or arm myself against.